When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 92, Learning That Her Identity is Not the Crown. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Sarah Kesnick. Sarah is an anti-human trafficking advocate, model, and business professional in the financial marketing industry with a passion for giving back. She has accomplished thousands of volunteer hours across international borders, received various awards in business, leadership, and the arts, thanks to her involvement with her local church and her degree in business and communications at the University of Waterloo. She attributes her entrepreneurial spirit to her upbringing immersed in hockey, visual arts, and travel. After a close friend of hers escaped from human trafficking, she was empowered by the opportunity to spread awareness about this issue. She completed governmental training before building out her curriculum for local and global communities. She is currently the founder of her own anti-human trafficking initiative, the Omega Project. Well, hello, Sarah.
Hi.
Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on this with you.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm actually really excited to have you on the show as well. I mean, there's so much that we're going to talk about.
Lot to get through, I guess.
Yeah, lots to get through. You know, I'm really delighted to have you as a guest on the show. I'm so grateful for your willingness to be here today, to tell your story, to talk about how it all unravels. You know, I say this frequently to guests who come on the show, but I truly am humbled for individuals like yourself who just really allowed me to tap into your vulnerabilities and draw on your strength and get those insights from your side. And it's all inspiration that gets shared in this space. And so I believe it's incredibly important that together we take a stance to help break barriers of mental stigma.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so honored to be here. I've done a number of interviews and things, but this is definitely a first for me in digging into the mental health side of my story. And so that's definitely a little bit nerve-wracking, but so exciting that that's happening at the same time. So thank you for having me and giving me this chance to talk a little bit more about that side of my story that most people don't hear about.
No, it's my pleasure. And it caught my attention when you said, that it's nerve-wracking but exciting. That's a term I have coined in my practice, in my therapy practice, as getting comfortably uncomfortable.
Oh, yes. 100%.
And Sarah, this podcast, I know you're not wondering because you're ready to dive in and we've discussed this, but this podcast is all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter what the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in
Hmm.
some way, which remains tucked away.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so this platform, the motivation of having this platform serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So, together, you and I, my hopeful mission for our conversation today is that both of us have an opportunity to encourage people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservation to express. And of course, I continue to bring forward a trend, and it's called the mental beauty rethink. So, Sarah, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear this phrase, the mental beauty rethink?
When I hear that, the first thing that I think of is learning to be patient with yourself through your growth. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, it's taking the time to understand yourself intellectually and emotionally. And I found that when you do this, you learn that everyone's on their own journey of doing this too. And if you grasp that mental beauty rethink is a very unique process to each
Mm-hmm.
person,
Mm-hmm.
then that's when you learn to be more patient with yourself through your growth and in turn more patient or gracious towards others because that process and timeline of learning who you are at your root differs
Mm-hmm.
from person to person.
Mm-hmm. I really like your spin on this. This is one of my favorite questions to ask because I get such a rich response, and no two responses are typically the same.
Hmm.
And so I always get excited and I'm always learning even more. So to me, it makes me feel like the intention of the phrase is doing its magic because for me, it's also about inviting people to be open to new perspective, to be welcoming of the unknown, to invite in intricate complexities and be okay with it. And so when you talk
Absolutely.
about this unique process and being patient and gracious and take the time to know who you are, no matter who you are and whatever it is that you've gone through or that you're going through, and be patient with yourself and you can grow. When you give that message, that is like encompassing very much my vision in a way that
Mhm.
I never thought to sort of convey it in that way. Like, but this, but it's like, it's still so fitting.
I'm glad. Like when I hear rethink, I just hear process because I think it
Interesting.
really is an ongoing thing because everybody's different from every stage of life, moment to
Hmm.
moment. And understanding what beauty is definitely something that changes to
Yeah.
the individual over time.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. Well, now we're going to be beginning our quest of questions.
Hmm. I'm
So
ready.
you're ready? I didn't
Oh,
even have to
as
ask.
ready as someone can be, I think.
All right, off we go. All right, Sarah, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
If others were to read a news article about my life, I wouldn't want to just spew a bunch of facts about me. I would want people to find application in my story or entice
Mm,
self reflection. So
mm,
my news title would be a question with a tagline. So it would read something like, "Where is your identity? A journey of growth and advocacy."
mm. All right, say it one more time, Sarah.
Where is your identity? A journey of growth and advocacy.
Mm. Where is your identity? A journey of growth and advocacy.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
What does this title represent for you? Can you share with us?
Yeah. So that question, where is your identity, is one that I find myself asking at every stage of life. And it's a constant lesson for my life. There's a line in the Bible that reads, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And
Mm,
so, in other words, where you're placing your time, your energy, what are you prioritizing in life? Where are you finding yourself or your value? That is where you will find your identity. Or in asking yourself, is that what you want to be shaping your identity after? And so that is a constant question that I'm asking myself. And so it is a process of growth that's led to the advocacy. And
Right.
that's where my story, I think the underlining theme is.
Yeah, that's beautiful and so reflective. And I really like how you started by saying, if someone was going to read my title, it's not going to be about facts. It's going to be about application of my story. It's going to be about that process, the understanding, pulling up and teasing out really important themes and learnings.
Yeah, I've always been one for looking for deeper themes or hidden meanings, and I'd
Hmm.
rather just try to spell it out if I can for other people. But
Yeah.
I've always been a bit of a book nerd, so when it comes to books or English class, that was always a favorite of mine is the application side of what is this author trying to say.
Mm. And also finding symbols, right? And
Hmm.
things like that. That's great. Okay. Well, then this just gets me even more intrigued because I know you have so much more to share. So tell us what your untold story is all about. Give us that snapshot.
So I was raised in a very loving home. I was very blessed to have parents that work to provide and just create a space where anyone and everyone was welcome to dinner at our home. We had a very revolving door type policy for dinner. I think that really gave me a community centered mindset in life and just that outward love for others. And so, being raised in that type of home, I was always seeking to build relationships with other people. I was a massive extrovert. In the more recent years, I've definitely learned to dial back and become more of an introvert, which is another thing. But
Hmm.
when I was little, very, very outgoing. You know, I talk about, like, I joke that my parents had to get the child leashes for me. They had a blue and a pink one because I have two brothers,
Hmm.
but they used them both on me. And because I was just so adventurous, I loved going anywhere and everywhere. And so that idea of taking, you've heard me use the word journey a few times, taking life as a journey has always been, I think, the core of who I am and loving home. But there comes a point in your life where you start to realize, oh, like this world isn't just this magical place I've made up. It is quite literally like the real world. And I think that
Hmm.
hit around the age of 9 when I
Hmm.
started facing some bullying within my classes. And
Hmm.
you know, it's around the 2008 2009 stock market crash, all that kind of stuff. So family faced financial pressures, and then I
Hmm.
faced some health issues during that time as well.
Okay.
During that process, it was just like one thing after another. All of a sudden, that rose colored glasses of the world just disappeared, and I started to see the world a little bit for what it actually was a little bit.
Right.
And just learning through that, finding who I was within these different kinds of messes from the bullying, the financial pressures your parents don't intentionally place on you, but
Well, you're witnessing it, right? You're
exactly.
observing it. You're in it, right? So it's
Yes.
like
And
your
if
parents can only shield you from so much when you're in the thick of it.
and if you see them going through some stresses, you start to ask, well, what can I be doing to help? And oftentimes there's nothing you can really do. And so that creates a different kind of stress on you that you might not understand.
Sure, because then there's also like guilt that might come up too, right?
Exactly.
Wondering if you should be asking for something or if there's even something you needed for school and it requires to spend money on something, even if it's a small thing.
Yeah,
Children are innocent. And if you're at that young age, you might not have known
exactly.
that it's okay to ask and they're your parents and they'll figure it out. But when you see that turmoil and you see the stress on their face and the exhaustion, I'm sure like it was limiting you from
hmm
really showing up the way you normally would have.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely
Hmm.
relate to that. Like I said, it was kind of a one thing after another. So I thought if I'm being bullied right now and by different people, then that's not where I'm going to find my comfort. That's not going to where I want to place who I am. I don't want to be defined by this bullying. So I place it in my family and in the things that I have, this house, my school that I go to, the things that create a status. And those started to be taken because of the financial pressures. And so I thought, you know, where else can I put my identity? Where else can I put who I am? And I put that into, you know, my health. You know, I'm healthy. I play lots of sports. I love to get involved. That's a blessing. I'm going
Hmm.
to really lean into that. And then I actually got shingles at the age of 10, which
Oh
is
my
like an
goodness.
old person, you know,
Yeah.
disease basically. And I got it all down my back. And then right at the same time was diagnosed with a very rare, extreme form of strep throat, basically. And it was so
Whoa.
bad that at the age of 10, while I'm going through my growth spurt and everything, I ended up losing around 13 pounds. So I dropped to 73 pounds. And
Oh my goodness.
at 5'6". So I was this very twig of a human for a while, and I almost needed a feeding tube. My identity was all of a sudden lost because I was like, well, I can't put it in my friends or my social life. I can't put it in my things that I have. I can't put it in my health. So being raised actually in a religious home, I actually really
Hmm.
leaned into that idea of something being bigger than myself. Something else was out there, something was taking care of me, or there is a constant. And so I
Right,
really leaned more into my faith during that time. And I'd say
right,
that's where I've since been able to root a lot of my identity, because it is that constant, and
right,
it tells me a lot of wonderful promises about who I am compared to
right,
these other things.
right. Sarah, I'm so curious, when you talk about really trying to understand this identity of yours,
Hmm.
it sounds like you weren't really able to label
Yeah.
health is this way, friends are this way, or my peer group is this way. Physically, I look different. I have different needs. I don't fit here. Mom and dad are going through this. Where do I turn? What do I do? There were so many unknowns. Can you say like how that made you feel? What was
Yeah.
that internal process like? Or like how did you cope?
It was a challenge. I'm not going to like sugarcoat it. A lot of people, I think, discredit how much children actually perceive or go through, and how much actually
Mm-hmm.
resonate with them. And I think all of us, once being a child, can look back to a time in your childhood where you're like, I was actually really hurt by this, or I was actually really affected by this issue. And to discredit then the future children who might come forward and say, this actually hurt me, and say, well, don't worry, you're still young. Like that's not, it's not healthy to do that. And so that's something I've given myself a lot of grace for and leaned into, and reflecting upon what I had experienced during those years was
Mm-hmm.
nothing short of just one massive trial and tribulation. It was a valley of my life, I'd say. There's lots of blessings throughout it. To answer your question, I was anxious. I was
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed. I was afraid in a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
aspects, because I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't really know where to go. I didn't understand these emotions that I was feeling. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
that anxiety was an issue. I didn't know that that was even a thing. So I couldn't label it, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever end up finding someone to confide in or sort your thoughts out with? Was there
Mm.
anyone in your life that you felt you could trust or felt that did understand you?
I give so much grace and love to my mom. She
Mm-hmm.
tried really hard to understand, and she was always there. And actually the reason why my health got worse actually right after she had left for a trip. So I don't think that there's lack of connection there. I think that there's actually a reason why my health declined as soon as she left a little bit. It was tied to her, and that fear of that one person that I was really needing or leading on in this time is gone. Like I said, like I was placing that identity or trying to seek it through friends, through my family, and there were so many inconsistencies. And so for me, like I said, it really did become about that faith, about that concept
Mm-hmm.
of meditation and prayer, and journaling became a massive part of my life when I was really young, because it allowed me that space where no one else would judge me.
Well, who introduced you to journaling?
That was just me. I love to write. When I was around 9, I had a great teacher who was introducing us to poetry and things like that. And it was that idea of reflection, or idea of
Right.
applying in a more poetic way, or writing your thoughts out.
So much turmoil and so much identity sorting and searching from such a young age. Fast forward a bit. What happened later?
Yeah. So I actually went to 2 different high schools. In my grade 9 year, it was more local public school, and
Mm-hmm.
I met some wonderful people, but at the same time, it wasn't really challenging me as much as I wanted it to academically. And I also was actually facing a lot of backlash for my faith. Like,
Mm.
I am a Christian, a lot of people, I didn't think that this would ever happen, but in Canada, but I had some teachers actually speak up against that, and it wasn't a space where I felt like I could truly just be. And
Well, it didn't seem safe. Yeah, it
yeah,
didn't feel safe at all.
when in talking about this to my parents, I think they definitely started to see throughout that year those anxieties and pressures that I was placing on myself to almost give up certain things, or just accept certain things as a reality, rather than, you're allowed to remove yourself from those situations if it really isn't good for you. And so they ended up finding me a different school that I ended up changing to, And
Mm-hmm.
it was wonderful. I found people who were loving and supportive. And so just really like was on this high of life, and it was wonderful, built some awesome relationships. And then I went to university. I wasn't 100% sure, that there's a lot of pressures changing to university saying you have to know what you want, like figure it out. But the biggest lie I think you're told going into university is that you have to have everything figured out. And
Right.
that's a lie that I believed going into university. And that caused a lot of additional, I think, stresses and pressures that I placed on myself. And I actually ended up getting a scholarship to play on a hockey team at Trinity Western University in British Columbia. And it's a private, smaller university on the West Coast. And it was a wonderful year. I had so much fun. But midway through the year, I actually was doing some dorm events and ended up destroying my shoulder. So I had to stop playing hockey. And that was
Oh no.
really hard for me because for a long time, I actually had been playing the sport at that time for about 12 years, 13 years. And so that meant I also wasn't able to continue with that additional little scholarship that did help with tuition. And so
Of course.
I took that time to pause and reflect. I was like, I felt going into this university, I was only going to be here for a year. And lo and behold, that's what ended up coming to pass. And I actually ended up losing 3 friends while I was out on the West Coast that I couldn't come home for. I lost one to suicide,
Right.
one to cancer, and one to an undiagnosed heart disease. And
Wow.
that was just really difficult to process because it was like, once again, one after another after another.
So this is three
hmm
deaths.
3 deaths.
And in a span of how much time?
It was within 2.5 months.
In 2.5 months.
Yeah, and they were all on the East Coast, so I couldn't return home for their funerals either. So that lack of
Right.
closure definitely hit me
Mm,
really hard during that time.
wow.
You asked me that question earlier, like who was a constant in your life that you could talk to? And
Yeah.
I actually, like, one of my best friends growing up was my grandma, actually, my mom's mom. I loved my
Oh,
grandma Margaret. She was this wonderful person. She took me downtown Toronto, and she'd teach me about giving back, where we would give these little toonies out to people who were homeless on the street, buy them meals, sit down, have conversations with them. She was beautiful human. And right after those friends passed, and I decided this was right at the tail end of my first year at university, I came home and she was re-diagnosed with colon cancer. And that was like another slap to the face a little bit to be like, oh man, now one of my best friends is going through this now too. And to
wow.
process that was really difficult. And on
Mhm.
top of that, I transferred schools. Like, I knew I couldn't stay on the West Coast, so I went back to my original plan to go to Laurier. And
Mhm.
I went to the school. They accepted me into their economics program because they said we don't accept non-first years into our BBA program. So once you're here,
Right.
then we'll internally transfer you in. But once I got there, they said, just kidding, we can't do that. Once again, it was just another piece of news that was just a slap to the face, where I'm a very goal oriented person and my goals were just thrown out the window. I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do from this point.
Right.
I'm not passionate enough about the program that I'm in. I know I could do
Mhm.
it. That's the harder thing too, like knowing you don't need to stay in those environments that you're not thriving in. Ended up transferring one more time after my second year to Waterloo University, where I finished my degree and just loved the rest of my experience there.
Mhm. Mhm.
So definitely a roller coaster.
Totally a roller coaster. I was just thinking the same thing. That is so much, and in such a short period of time. I
hmm
can only imagine that it was hard to process everything at one go, and it must have taken a lot of time and aftermath to kind of really reel from all of that. And it sounds like there was one thing that you were doing was listening to your like internal signals. So if you
hmm
were far from home and you realized I needed to come back and be closer, you found a way to do that.
hmm hmm
Having so many losses in such a short period of time, along with not just grieving death, but the injury and the loss of
hmm
this scholarship, the loss of this hockey and what it meant to you. And what is the school I'll be graduating from,
Yes.
right? When you have an idea of where you think you're going, I mean, it's natural to assume that if I'm attending this school, I'll be graduating from the school, and then it changes, and it
Right.
seemed to change in a heartbeat for you, right? Just so quickly. So
Right.
I just don't know how you did it.
Well, I think it was definitely, it came down to my community. Like, even
Yeah.
though I was really struggling, I still had people to turn to, people who would check in on
Mhm.
me. I'm really, really grateful for those people. And then once again,
Yeah.
that belief in something bigger than myself, that things were going to work out in the end, that
Yeah.
optimistic point of view, even
Yes.
though there was definitely periods where I could not find it. I was so hurt by everything that was going on that I had a
Right.
really hard time seeing that optimistic perspective. But that's when my community stepped up and really walked with me.
And that's lovely that you had that backbone support, right?
Hmm.
So then I'm curious about how all of these pieces of your story, all these puzzle pieces, how do they weave into the part where you found a way to support anti-human trafficking?
That's a pretty big part of that story too. Was it was while I was at the University of Waterloo, and I got this message from a friend who hadn't heard from her in a little bit. Her name was different on Facebook, so I was like, oh, I don't really know what's going on. But she confirmed it was her through these memories, and she was like, hey, like I just love to like catch up and see how you're doing and get like grab some coffee. And I said, great, that would be wonderful. And I shared with her what I had been up to, and then I started asking her where she had been for the past 3 or 4 years. And she said, I've actually been in a very toxic relationship and situation. And when you hear that
Mm,
as a friend, you almost become empty inside. You don't know how to react because
right,
apologizing for the situation that they were going through doesn't seem like enough. It seems like, man, I should have been
right.
there. I should have said something. Like, I should have checked in. Like, how, tell me more. And she actually explained to me that her boyfriend turned out to be her trafficker. And he had lured her
Wow.
and groomed her over the course. And this is in Oakville, Ontario. So it's a very local thing, convinced her to over time start doing these different things for him, which turned into an enslavement of her because he slowly took her information. He started, controlling every part and aspect of her life to the point where she couldn't leave. She was either afraid for her life, afraid for family's life, afraid for the unknown of not knowing what to do if she escaped, or and it took her for a while to have that epiphany too, that this was really just not even just an unhealthy relationship alone, but this was quite literally slavery. And it was through the help of a local anti-trafficking organization that had helped rescue her. And leaving that situation with her, that conversation, after hearing everything she went through, I promised her that I would educate myself more. I was like, I had no idea
Hmm.
that this was even an issue in our
Right,
society. And so
right.
that's what I did. I took some governmental training. I just started learning more, asking a lot of questions. And as I did this, I just saw the conversation naturally come into my day to day conversations more. And more, I
Hmm.
started to hear how other people were actually affected by it. People in my university sharing experiences with me of them being groomed or lured or affected by a friend or family member, or someone at my gym, or someone in whatever stage of life, like all these people all of a sudden coming forward. And I was like, whoa, I had no idea. And that's when I got multiple advertisements. This is where the crown side of everything comes in, that title that you created for this episode, where like I started seeing this advertisement to compete for a Miss Canada title. I
Right.
jokingly showed my mom because we're close enough that I was like, haha, look at this advertisement. And she said, you're doing it. I chuckled and I said, no way. What are you talking about? I'm not doing that. She says, no, I would like you to try it.
Interesting.
Being someone who's just such a go-getter, like always trying new things, I was like, man, this just feels like a challenge I want to take on just to say I did it. And as I started researching the pageant more, I saw the values of it and I saw the environment that it created. And it's a very philanthropic pageant. It's the oldest pageant in the world. It focuses a lot on your initiative. Its big tagline is
Hmm.
beauty with a purpose. And so I was like, what could my purpose be? Like, what could my project or initiative be to bring forward? And it was around the exact same time my friend was going through all this. And I said,
Right,
I saw a gap in our education systems.
right,
We weren't being properly informed on this issue. And so I created curriculums for advocating against human trafficking and sex trafficking, and mostly for parents and teachers. I don't believe it's necessarily my place to go into the home and educate the child specifically on this matter, though I do teach children on healthy relationships because at the
right.
root of it, that's what it is. And
Of course.
yeah, so that's how that kind of came to be.
Wow. Your friend, was she able to escape?
Yeah, so the reason why she was able to contact me was because she had escaped. She's currently in a safe house elsewhere.
Okay.
So she is safe. She's receiving the mental health and care that she needs.
How did she escape? Is that something you're able to share at all? I could always use more education in this
Yeah,
sensitive area because we it's not spoken about much, right? It's not
yeah.
talked about. I've met a few people who've told me different things and stories, but maybe not really going through so much detail.
Hmm.
But what I know is that escaping is such a complex thing that even when people have attempted, the traffickers find you and there's other like punishments or penalizations. So I'm just so curious about
Yeah.
how she managed to be successful to escape.
So it was a little bit of a time and place situation. And there's a
Wonderful.
lot of different organizations actually locally that help with the rescuing. So I'm partnered with one called Fight for Freedom, and they do some of the physical rescuing. And there's a lot of organizations that basically walk the streets with existing survivors or people who've been trained in this. They're not police,
Mhm.
they're not experts in military or anything, but they're just individuals who have a passion for this, who saw a need, and they were trained properly. So they walk the streets of Oakville, of Mississauga, Burlington, of across Canada, across the world, and they look for signs of symbols of different trafficking scenarios. So in Canada, it's very relational. You can't just walk up and just nab them from the situation and run away with them necessarily. There are instances of that, but it's definitely
Mhm.
not the most common approach. It's very relational too. Because at the end of the day, these traffickers have placed these women in places where it's a very consistent routine or schedule. It's all like under their own watch. So they know
Mhm.
what's going on. The girls don't necessarily all the time, but essentially these workers walk the streets. I don't want to give too many details, but they saw her
Sure.
on the streets, just casually had a normal conversation. She played it off like normal. Because at this time, you're groomed so much to be afraid that nobody's able to help you. This is your life now. You can't escape.
Right.
So you just have to always act as normal as you can.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
these experts obviously just kind of were able to pick up on different things from her physical appearance, her like energy levels, just how tired she looked. There were people around just kind of watching her or right by her side. And they were always short little snippet conversations, but they'd pass each other in the passing every few weeks or so. And then a few months in, finally just said, if you need help in whatever capacity, just like say the word and we'll help you. And like it kind of just got to that point where they actually negotiated a deal with the traffickers saying, we'll take her
Wow.
off your hands. They kind of just bought her back, but that's not a common approach.
Yeah.
A lot of the times it's very much the girl just has to run. She decides she
Right.
has to make the conscious decision and she runs. And the thing is, even when they're quote unquote purchased back,
Right.
they're always tied to their traffickers. So she has to change her name. She will never get the life that she had beforehand, but the goal is to make it as normal as we can from this point forward, which she's on the path of
Mhm.
recovery too. But yeah, it's pretty crazy because every story,
Wow.
rescue story is a little bit different, but they're at the end of the day, they all need the resources of the mental health support, of the physical housing support and living situation. Because of course the goal is to get them home one day or a new home, but for a period of time while things cool down, they need a safe place.
It really sounds like this is where your passion really ignited.
Hmm.
The Omega Project, when did you launch it? I don't think we ever discussed the timeline.
Yeah, so I launched it actually in 2021 mid-year. It hasn't been around
Hmm.
too long, but that's when I really started building the relationships with other people slash like organizations, like the Rotary
Right.
Club, different school boards. I've
Yeah.
spoken with my local mayor, some other mayors.
Because I saw a documentary and then even I think it was like a movie. A lot of the things that you discussed and described today, I saw it and I thought, wow, there's so much, when you're trying to escape that the individual has to contend with. And even if your family is looking for you, all of the red tape and all of the different
Yeah.
obstacles that come along the way that don't make it easy
Hmm.
to have success and what really you need to do in order to have the success and it's not guaranteed. I thought this needs to be out there more. People need to see
Hmm.
this and hear this and read about it and learn about it and talk about it. because it is so impactful,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? And the more we know, the more we can help.
Yes, absolutely. That's my heart behind it.
Yeah. So Sarah, tell me, so when people come to see me for therapy, people are usually in like one of three places when they come. Some people are getting started where they bring all their stuff and they say, okay, I've got a bunch of stuff to work through, work out, sort out.
Hmm.
There's a lot of sorting that has to happen. Sometimes people are in the middle of maybe an acute crisis or a situation, or they're needing some support navigating particular parts of their life. And some people are looking back where are either trying to get closure on some parts of their life, or they're trying to have some personal growth so that they can move forward and be more resilient in their life as they go into new chapters of their future. Where in the journey for yourself would you say that you're in? Would you say that you are getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
I'd say in the specific moment, I am a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more reflective on everything that
Mm-hmm.
I've walked through and experienced, but I know that I, Lord willing, still have a lot of life ahead of me. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously,
Mm-hmm.
like just bracing for how do you just build those habits or learn, like you said, from things you've gone through. That's I'd say
Sure.
definitely the tail end of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have another curious question of mine.
Please.
Okay, so I want to know, like we've talked already a little bit about the bullying, the financial impacts growing up,
Mm,
this whole piece about your identity and trying to understand it and really embrace who you are, the health ailments and learning about your friend and even the deaths. I can only imagine how much grief and mental well
mhm.
being was impacted. I'm curious about how all of this had affected your mental health at the time. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah, because it was a big impact, I think.
Such a big impact.
So those first points that you mentioned, like the bullying, the financial impact, and the health, those were all tied to actually an anxiety like that
Hmm.
that I hadn't realized that I'd been battling with because once again, I didn't have a label for it.
And what did the anxiety look like for you?
So a lot of it started as overthinking, overanalyzing, going back, reflecting so much onto why is this happening? Did I do something wrong? Those constant questions slowly snowballed because I kept like mixed with the pressures I was placing on myself or pressures placed by others. And it ended up developing. I had my first panic attack actually when I was 10. So in the thick of all of that.
Wow.
And I didn't know what that was. I thought I was dying because
Sure.
I didn't know there was such thing as a panic attack. I didn't know how to deal with it. I was actually with
Hmm.
my dad's mom, my grandmother, on the other side during that time. And she like sweetest woman ever, love her to death, obviously, but she just
Hmm.
gave me literally a brown paper bag to breathe through. I didn't know people used that either. And so I did because I didn't know what to do.
Right.
And
Hmm.
and that was my first ever panic attack. And that was at the time the reason why I was with my grandmother was because my mom was gone. She went away on that trip. It was just a short trip.
Right.
But like I said,
Right.
that's actually when the health issues started to go down.
Right.
And so my doctors actually told me that the reason why I got shingles and strep throat was a stress induced issue.
Wow. Okay. So it really manifested physically.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that.
Right. And that just kind of ties back into, something I've shared in the past, which is like physical health and mental health are very much intertwined and related.
Mhm.
And oftentimes we see them as silos and we treat them in silos, or they can be treated in silos. But the things that affect our physical health do have a mental health impact, and things that we're affected by in our mental health do have a physical impact as well. And so we
Mhm.
really need to start looking at treatments and even just thought processing of just connecting the two and
Mhm.
understanding that they're relational within each other.
Absolutely. For me, it once again tied back to that because so much of it was this process of working through it on my own slash with my faith and but
Hmm.
essentially like I was alone in my room processing these things. And one thing that I did have this epiphany of, which was at the tail end of everything when I was working out that identity issue was I didn't want my mental health issues to be another identifying factor of me. I didn't
Right.
want it to define who I was. And that was when I realized that it's very much like you there's different layers of 100% levels of mental health issues, but this was not something that I wanted to control me. And in a way,
Mm,
it is such a mental game to some capacity, because I saw, even
right.
like when my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, I saw her for a few days slash weeks become a shell of a human. It impacts you so much
Mm-hmm.
emotionally that it
Mm-hmm.
affects and manifests into your physical. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to be defined by that. And so I became kind of headstrong against it. And that's why I took my
Mm-hmm.
journaling so seriously, and I used it as an outlook, and I sought out intentional healing, saying, this doesn't define me. It's part of me right now, but I won't let it define me.
Mm-hmm. 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 And so, how did you make peace with that, right?
hmm
Because, I mean, what you're saying is that there was this big resistance that you had with accepting that, there's a mental health component here.
It came down to that brainstorming of, I've had all these things happen, tried placing my identity in all these different things. I don't want to place my
Mm-hmm.
identity in this mental health issue, so where do I place it? And
Mm-hmm.
so I found that peace when I was like, I'm going to place it in my faith in God. Personally, like, everybody finds it differently, but that's where I personally found it. And it was because, specifically growing up, I had heard all these beautiful promises that, hey, when you're in trouble, you can lean into this, that there is this God that cares about you. And so that's something I personally leaned into, because there was promises
Right.
that came with that I chose to believe, that were, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. By the grace of God, I am what I am, and all those different things. And that idea of like taking a step back to be like, sometimes it's not about me. Sometimes, like, these bigger issues are in the hands of someone else. And just trying to find peace with
Mm-hmm.
that a little bit. Like, I learned, for example, the bullying that I was going through. Yes, it 100% affected me. Yes, I was impacted, and I can't belittle or deny that those were emotions and things that I felt and went through. But understanding the why behind those other people were taking those actions against me actually came to light. It's sometimes you'll never understand the why, but I was blessed that I learned, one of my main bulliers was going through a lot of issues in their own home. I
Mm-hmm.
learned that some other people, like one of them had lost their dad. I learned that
Right.
someone was going through another health issue. And so it kind of gives you perspective that there's more going on within the lives of those around you.
Yeah, when you can reconceptualize and reframe as
hmm
well, take a step back and say, well, what are the other possibilities? Like, what else is going on? And if this is not about me, what is happening? And
Exactly.
there might be parts that I am going to learn about, and there's going to be parts that I don't know. But I can also let myself know that there. This is not about me. This is about them. They have their own story or their own thing, and
hmm
there's clearly something that has happened or is happening in their life that is getting them to be in the place that they are right now. But I have to be clear about who I am and what I am so
hmm
that I don't get defined by that.
You hit it. You summarized everything. That is my story in so many ways, is taking that
Hmm.
perspective and applying it at every
Hmm.
stage of my life, because there's
Hmm.
always something else going on, and sometimes it's not about you.
Most of the time, it's not. The issue is that as us humans, we take it personal.
Exactly.
If you're placing your worth in the hands of others, if you have this tendency to be a people pleaser,
hmm
then you're going to think, I did something wrong,
Yeah.
right? I need to show
hmm
them I'm a good person.
Yeah.
Why doesn't this person like me?
Yeah.
I am a likable person. I am fun. Why would they treat me that way? There, I must be defective, right? So these are the
Yes.
kind of narratives that I've heard time and time again. And, some of which I've had from my childhood as well, right? Different things
hmm
that we grow up with. And that's the other part is what do we program when we're younger with our limited perspective? It's
hmm
our perspective, but oftentimes there's other information we didn't process or we weren't privy to. So we're told ourselves a story based on information that might not be factual or is only partial,
Yes, 100%. And
right?
that's exactly like how the pageant world, for example, can become so toxic, as girls are entering into these spaces without knowing who they are yet. And so they're
Right,
placing their value in that crown when it's
right,
your value that defines the crown.
exactly, right.
That's why I felt like I was able to enter into those spaces and be so
Hmm.
encouraged by some of the women, but also have this
Right.
chance to encourage others. because
Amazing.
it takes that time to be like, okay, like, where are you placing your identity right now? Why are you actually doing this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so this is probably a really good time to ask you, what is your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you really want them to know?
Once again, tying back to that title from like, where is your identity? A story of growth and advocacy. Like, my one takeaway I'd love for you to, like, any listener to ask is, where are you placing your value, your time, your energy, and your resources? Because where you are
Mm,
prioritizing all those things is where your identity is going to be. And is that where you want your identity? What is defining
mhm,
you? Where is your identity?
mhm,
That's my heart. That's, I think, where a lot of that ties to, especially because, just a little last tidbit here is like, I love the story of like Alexander the Great. When he was dying, he had three main wishes. He wanted the best doctors to carry his coffin, he wanted them to throw gold and riches along the paths on his way to the graveyard, and he wanted his hands hanging out of his coffin. All three very weird asks, but the reason why was because he wanted people to know that even at the end of life, the best doctors can't save you. Throw your golden riches because you can't bring any of it with you to the grave, and let your hands be empty, because as you're brought into this world, you leave with your hands empty as well. And so he's
right,
quoted by basically saying, like, don't build any monument, keep my hands outside so the world knows the person who won the world had nothing in his hands when dying, because that's not where you should be placing your identity, essentially, in those things.
right, right. Any other message for the listeners?
Just, you are so loved. Like, it,
Mm,
even if you don't feel it, you are so unbelievably loved. There are people who care about you, who love you. Like, I might not know you, but I have a care and deep care for you. And like,
mhm,
you're
mhm.
you're braver than you believe, you're stronger than you seem, and you're smarter than you think, but you are loved.
Wonderful. Okay, so tell us, Sarah, what is your game changer inspiration? Like, what was that game changing inspiration for you that's close to you that reflects your untold story? Like, was there something that you came across, like a quote or a book or an
Mm.
event or a speaker or something that really sparked, like, oh, this is what is making me pivot, or this is why I'm driven to do this thing now, like
Yeah.
to shift?
I respect that everybody has a different one. For me personally, I was choosing to believe that, like, God said, hey, like, you are not made to strive to be perfect in this world, but I sent someone who is perfect for you. And you can lean
Hmm.
into that truth, and you can, whether you believe it or not, and you can find a lot of peace in that, because ultimately, like, I love you. And if like the
Mm,
God of everything loves you, then who can be against you, kind of thing, was kind of my
right.
mentality and what really brought me out of that.
Right. But that's your force, right?
Yeah,
That was your ammunition. That was what kept you going. That was your
absolutely.
inspiration. Okay. So tell us, what is a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey that you would like to give a shout out to? Tell me.
Fight for Freedom. This is the organization that I mentioned I partnered with. Obviously, I'd like to promote
Hmm.
my own, but ultimately, Fight for Freedom is just this wonderful organization based out of Canada with chapters in the United States and the Philippines. They have all chapters, from education to the actual rescuing of girls and children. And they have been a very big stepping stone to support me. And I'd love to just always turn back and support them.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great. Fight for freedom. All right. And of course, the Omega Project.
Yes, I'm going to put that out there one more time, the
We'll
Omega
just
Project.
slide it in there.
I provide free resources on my own website about this, and all my speaking engagements are free, because I believe this education should be accessible to everyone who needs to hear it.
Beautiful. Okay, so how can people connect with you if they would like to? Just let us know where you're findable.
Yeah, so my website is omegaprojectca.com, and I have a Facebook account. I'm sure we can link that somewhere, as well as my Instagram. And my email is tied to the website, the Facebook, and the Instagram. So if people wanted to respond, I do have an email account, omegaproject.ca@gmail.com.
Yeah, and these will all be like included in your show notes page as well.
Awesome.
So
Well, go find it there, everyone. Yeah,
one stop shop, right?
absolutely. Even just for a conversation, just a friendly hi.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sarah, guess what?
What?
You just dared yourself to share.
Yay!
Congrats.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Oh, this is
yes.
so wonderful. I'm sure you have a lot of epiphany moments on your show of, the speaker being like, I haven't actually like said this before, but
You know what? It is very true that, guests often do tell me epiphany moments that they've had, but I also have my own epiphany moments, just, connecting
good.
to my own self by listening to the journey of another individual.
Well, thank you for creating that space.
Oh, thank you for being here. And Sarah, I would just like to take a moment to express my gratitude again for the deep story that was shared in this space today. The ability to take a deep dive and start from this journey that you began at such a young age to contending with the numerous life hardships that came up, to finding yourself in the depths of human connection as your curiosity,
Hmm.
passion, and ability to serve the population of those who endure or have endured sex trafficking. Your story is so incredible, and it's one that, I'm glad has been shared, and it needs to be heard, and it's going to inspire others to tap into their own journey as well. I'm truly grateful to have been able to hear and witness your story today. So thank you for the deep conversation and for all the daring and all the sharing.
Well, it was my pleasure, and thank you so much for once again providing me that space. And I think there's value in everyone's story. So I love listening to your other episodes too.
Lovely. Once again, Sarah, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.